There once was a boy named Eli. He wasn't born broken. He began life full of wonder, constantly asking, why, and dreaming in vibrant colors. But the world didn't reciprocate the care he needed. His father came home late, his arrival marked by loud outbursts and a pervasive rage. His mother, in stark contrast, retreated into a world of silence. Eli learned to navigate the house on tiptoe, memorizing the creaking floorboards as if they were deadly landmines. The dinner table became a war zone of hurled insults. But the real poison wasn't just the trauma itself. It was the constant denial, the pretense of normalcy, the forced smiles during public appearances. The lack of a simple, "Hey, something's wrong here," was profoundly damaging. You see, the human mind is resilient, but it's not indestructible. Trauma doesn't just sit in memory. It embeds itself within the body, rewiring the very way a person perceives the world, other people, and most devastatingly, themselves. This instilled in Elias the unshakable belief that he was inherently unsafe and unworthy. As he grew older, so did the mask he wore. He became charming, witty, and a chameleon, transforming into whatever persona was required. Yet, beneath the surface, he was empty. A room ravaged by fire where the walls remained standing, but the life within was completely gone. This is the devastating legacy of unprocessed trauma, a fragmentation of the self. Carl Jung stated, "The greatest tragedy of the family is the unlived lives of the parents." Eli inherited this tragedy through the suffocating silence and relentless emotional neglect. His descent into mental distress was gradual. It began with insomnia, a persistent feeling that something was wrong, even when everything seemed outwardly fine. This was followed by paranoia, overwhelming rage, and intense self-loathing. Trust became an insurmountable obstacle. He couldn't trust anyone, not even himself. Relationships became minefields where he would push people away only to desperately beg them to remain. Love itself morphed into a battlefield. He attempted therapy once, confiding that he felt utterly devoid of emotion and failed to recognize the man staring back in the mirror. His therapist diagnosed him with anxiety and depression. But these labels failed to address the true monster lurking beneath the surface, the deeply buried pain. Because when trauma is ignored, it doesn't vanish. It hides, it festers, it patiently waits for its opportunity to emerge, and one day, it inevitably does. This manifestation might take the form of a complete mental breakdown, an addiction, or the sudden, chilling silence of someone who once had the most infectious laughter. Eli began speaking to himself, not fleeting thoughts, but full-blown conversations and anguished screams. Friends remarked on the noticeable changes. The truth was, he had always been this way. He had simply run out of the energy to maintain the charade any longer. This is the often overlooked aspect of mental illness. It's not madness, it's utter exhaustion. It's the soul's surrender, its abandonment of the performance. When a person dedicates their life to suppressing wounds, the psyche eventually fractures. The mind is not a machine. It's a delicate tapestry woven from memories and emotions. When too much of this fragile tapestry is saturated with pain and silence, it inevitably begins to unravel. Eli started believing the voices, seeing patterns and symbols in utterly meaningless places. He believed the universe was communicating with him directly. What was actually happening was his mind, starved of order, was desperately trying to make sense of what had never been addressed. This is the cruel deception of unresolved trauma. It offers no respite. It masks itself as anxiety, anger, or even mystical insight. But beneath all this lies a child desperately screaming, "Please notice me, save me, help me." He didn't succumb because he was weak. He succumbed because he had remained strong for far too long. Some called it madness, but a therapist offered a different perspective: individuation. the process of becoming whole by confronting the dark, chaotic aspects of the self. But for Eli, this process felt like a terrifying descent into the abyss. The descent into madness isn't a singular event. It's a gradual process. From an outsider's perspective, it appears as a sudden collapse. But they fail to see the quiet suffering and silent nights that preceded it. When you bury the past, you don't eliminate it. You amplify its power. Unresolved trauma becomes a persistent ghost. This is where the line between sanity and insanity blurs. In psychology, we talk about the false self, the version of oneself created solely for survival. This false self wears masks and buries the truth so deeply that even you may forget its existence. But the truth, however buried, never forgets its owner. Eventually, the mask cracks. And when this facade shatters, what remains? The shadow self, the rage, the grief, the internal voice that whispered, "You were never loved the way you needed to be." This is the true nature of a mental breakdown. It's not an illness in the conventional sense. It's the psyche collapsing under the immense weight of sustained pretense. Madness is the soul's rebellion. Paradoxically, it's also a chance for healing. When everything crumbles, you are finally left with the one thing that holds the potential for salvation: the truth. Eli's truth was stark and unrelenting. He had been abused and neglected, never truly seen. For years he told himself it didn't matter, but it did. Carl Jung believed that healing begins when the unconscious is brought into the light of consciousness. The act of facing one's darkness, rather than fleeing from it, marks the beginning of redemption. This process is challenging. Confronting the past necessitates feeling everything that was meticulously avoided. Beneath the numbness lies something even more frightening: vulnerability. To venture into your shadow self, you must become soft and receptive again. You must grieve. Eli started writing, not for clarity, but to purge the pain. The pages of his notebook were a chaotic jumble of scribbles and repetitive phrases. I didn't deserve this. This simple statement was transformative. It granted him permission to finally feel anger, sadness, and the full spectrum of human emotion. And in that raw honesty, he found something he hadn't experienced in years: hope. Healing doesn't come from motivation. It begins with brutal honesty. Eli returned to therapy, but this time, he simply wept, releasing years of pent-up emotions. He wept for the child who had grown up too quickly, for the adult who had never felt safe, and for the madness that suddenly made sense once he stopped running. He wasn't cured, but he was no longer lost. Madness wasn't the enemy. It was a message. And when he dared to open the door to those hidden parts, they didn't attack him. They expressed gratitude. If you've ever felt like you're losing your grip on reality, understand this: you're not broken. You're buried. Healing isn't about becoming a new person. It's about remembering who you were before pain taught you to forget. How do you begin? Start with silence. Not the numb silence of disconnection, but the sacred silence of attentive listening. Write, scream, walk, cry. Do it consciously, without shame. Read books that go beyond symptoms and delve into the unconscious mind. And above all, don't strive for perfection in your healing. Strive for authenticity. Heal so you can be truly real, so you can look in the mirror and recognize the person staring back. The world doesn't need more masks. It needs more people who have confronted their shadows and returned stronger.